Ian Gillan, what is the origin of the song Smoke on the Water?
Well, Smoke on the Water's got quite a history to it. It was, um, strangely enough, it emerged as probably the best known song from the Machine Head album that we recorded in Montreux in November 1971. And it was a whole string of events. In fact, the entire recording of Machine Head is encapsulated en précis in the lyric of Smoke on the Water, which started off as a sound check. We were originally supposed to be recording at the casino, and we arrived beforehand. The Rolling Stones mobile truck came and it was parked next to the casino. And the next day was the last day of the season, and we were going to take over because, as everyone knows, Montreux is a summer resort, and so we were going to record in the casino, in the theatre. And Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention were performing the last show of the season, and we went along to watch. And halfway through the show, brilliant show, some guy came in over my right shoulder. I saw something. I wasn't aware what it was. I didn't actually see it go, but suddenly there's two flares from a flare gun, a very pistol, a signal gun, and they hit the ceiling, the trunking, the electricity trunking on the far side. And very quickly, it was a wooden building, and very quickly the flames, it started going, and I don't think anyone realized how serious it was to start with. And then all of a sudden, a lot of smoke and crackles and electrical action, and so Claude Nobbs came in, and Frank Zappa stopped the show and said everyone should leave and don't panic and whatever. So, and then Claude went down into the kitchens underneath because there were some people down there, and a lot of smoke, and he got everyone out. And we went, everyone got out, and we went scattered along the lakeshore, and we just watched this amazing sight of this, what was once just a beautiful old building. Suddenly these huge flames, and the downdraft from the mountains was blowing the smoke across the lake. And Roger Glover wrote on a napkin, "Smoke on the Water," from the fire onto the Lake Geneva. And so they managed to get the Rolling Stones mobile truck away from the theatre, away from the flames. And we started off then, emergency. Claude was brilliant. Not only did he save lives that night, but he also made it possible for us to complete the record. And so we started off, I think, in the ballroom at the Palace Hotel, but we were making too much noise, and the police came, and the hotel the neighbors were unhappy. So, but we did one thing, and that was to put down this sound check, which was down, bam, 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 and it was just to test the sound. It was just a jam, an idea that Richie had, and so we forgot about it, and we ended up at the Grand Hotel, and we recorded these songs. And towards the end of our time there, the engineer, Martin Birch, said, you've only got one more day, and we're still short of material for the record. We need at least one more song. Oh, one day, well, got to write another song in one day. And he said, look, that thing that you did, that sound check, the Dan Dan song or whatever it was called, why don't you write something over that? So Roger and I wrote what was basically a biographical story of what had happened over the previous couple of weeks. And so we all came out to Montreux on the Lake Geneva shoreline to make records with a mobile. We didn't have much time. Frank Zappa and the Mothers, etc., etc., etc. So the whole story was told in the lyric. And it was just an add-on track. It was a bonus. And it wasn't until some time later that some guy in Warner Brothers in Los Angeles said, because we were performing it on stage, and the kids loved it, but it never got played on the radio because the song was 7 minutes long. So this guy at Warner Brothers said, well, why don't we do an edit and make a short version? And so then it started getting played, and I think that's what helped the record become so successful, the album Machine Head. So we owe everything to Montreux and for the success of that album, and specifically Funky Claude, who's mentioned in the lyric, pulling kids out the ground, not literally of course, but metaphorically, figuratively. And so it's something we shall never, as it says, Swiss time is running out, but we shall never forget Smoke on the Water, ever.
When it really happened at that time, did you think, when you saw the smoke and the water, that this could be a song? Do you sometimes think of this when events happen in front of you?
No, you never imagine the commerciality of a song. We never think of commerciality or the impact. In fact, we were just grateful to have some inspiration and some idea of what to write, because we only had 24 hours left to complete this song. It doesn't normally take a long time to write a song. If it's no good after 20 minutes or half an hour, then we normally tear it up anyway, because otherwise it's contrived. But no, we had no idea that Smoke on the Water was going to have the impact it did.
Do we know who was the person who did this and why he did? Was it really trying to put this on fire, or was it just a moment of joy? What is your feeling?
At the time, it was described as a happening. This is what was a big thing in the 60s and 70s. But even the people who were there, there are differing descriptions. Somebody said, oh, it's a guy that jumped out of a Rolls Royce and came in and just went and ran out again. Another one said it was somebody who came in and walked away down the street, went away on a moped, and somebody said it was a tall, dark guy. Somebody said it was a short, blonde guy. And so we have no idea, because, to be honest, I didn't see it happen. Because this thing was silent, it didn't go bang, bang. It just went, if that. I was just aware of like a firework, a Roman candle,
But what is your personal feeling or opinion? Do you think that this was a moment of joy, like greeting something, or was this a really a criminal intention?
I don't think there was any criminal intention at all. It turned out to be a disaster, of course. But I don't think there was any criminal intention at all. If there was, you've got to be a genius to think that this is actually going to hit exactly that one place where the electric cable is. No, I think it was a moment of joy that went terribly wrong. That's what it was.
But why do you think that this song became so enormously popular? What is the key to that?
Well, it's a good story, and it's a very simple song. Sometimes the simplicity, it's got a good riff, it's got a good tune, it's got a good chorus, and it's got a good lyric. And those are the ingredients you want, I think, for a song to make contact or have impact or communicate with an audience. And it still does. It's still a very powerful communicator. We'll be doing it tonight.
What does Montreux mean to you? What are, let's say, your strongest memories?
Well, obviously, the making of Machine Head is the strongest memory. But coming back many times to perform at the Montreux Jazz Festival has been a joy, and to meet up with old friends. And whenever we come to town, it's not just like another concert. It's a special event, because I always like to walk around the town and see the different acts that are on. And we don't always have enough time, but it's, if possible, we have a little party.
But you choose various places in Switzerland. This time, for instance, in 2010, Caribana Festival. Why this choice?
We don't choose anything, to be honest.
Really?
No, we get invited, and that's it. I don't think the band even knows where we're going. We started in Australia on this tour. We came up through the tropics, the equatorial zone in the Eastern Hemisphere, into China, then up to Vladivostok, across through Karbos, Russia, Armenia, down to South Africa, back up into Europe again. Here we are tonight, tomorrow we go back to Russia, then we have 2 weeks off, then we start all over again. I have no idea where we're going or until I get my little tour book on the next session. I know we're starting in Belfast, but
On stage, do you feel the difference of, let's say, of an atmosphere depending on the countries? Can you feel that, or is it really a similar public whether you are in
I
Russia
mean,
or Switzerland?
even in the same country, the atmosphere changes every time you play a show. I mean, it depends on the venue. You may be playing in the summer an outdoor venue, in the winter an indoor venue. It depends on what time of night you're playing, how long. If people have been listening to artists all day long, they may be tired. If it's a big excitement, it depends on the sound, the ambience, all of those things. I think you can safely say that, you know, if you get more of a South American or Latin audience, they tend to be a little more crazy than perhaps the Northern European audiences. It depends. But, you know, mostly these days we're playing to a very young audience. The average age of our audience is 18 years old now. And the great thing about that is that they have tremendous amount of energy. And so they give a lot more than perhaps an older audience would give, who perhaps are a little more cerebral.
What is your personal explanation when you say young people still come to see your concerts? It's an amazing statement. I mean, it's true, it's obvious. How do you explain that?
I don't know. I asked my daughter, we were playing at Wembley about, I don't know, 8 years ago. And in the dressing room afterwards, I said to Grace, who let all the kids in? What's going on here? And she said, Dad, you just don't get it, do you? Deep Purple is really cool. And I thought, that's all right. But I think it's more to do with the fact that, you know, a lot of fashions have come and gone with music, and Deep Purple plays real music. It's quite, there's quite a broad base to it. So there's a lot of funk, there's a lot of jazz, there's a lot of rock and roll, there's a lot of orchestral, there's a lot of soul and blues. And so all of those things have been melded into the history of Purple over the years, and we've got very solid roots. Plus, it's a very hot band. I mean, the guys are fantastic musicians, so it's quite a joy. I mean, from where I'm standing, I love it. I mean, it's quite dangerous every night. It's a big challenge. There's a lot of improvisation, and so it gets scary up there. And I think the thrill and the interaction of being there, I would have loved to, when I was a kid, have come along and seen Deep Purple, for sure.
When you say dangerous, do you love this? Do you love this danger?
Yeah, I get squiggles in my tummy every lunchtime on a show day, for sure.
Which is healthy.
I think so.
In 1969, why did you choose to join Deep Purple?
Well, it was fortuitous. It was serendipitous. It was incredible. It's just one of those things. I'd been with Roger Glover in a band called Episode 6 for nearly 5 years. We'd made 14 singles, I think, and we've been touring quite a bit. You know, I remember very fond memories of touring with Dusty Springfield and going to Beirut and going to the rock clubs in Germany, and where you had to do 5 shows a night and 8 shows on Saturday, 8 shows on Sunday, and we were ready, and the band that we were with was changing, and it was, I think, not going anywhere. We'd missed our moment, and Deep Purple was ready to look for a new singer. They were basically looking for a new singer, and then they saw me and Roger, and they thought, well, they get a new bass player as well. So we joined not just as a singer and a bass player, but also as a songwriting team, and so it worked very well. If you imagine, well, you know, if you go to a party on your own, it takes a little while to get used to strangers and to feel comfortable. But if you go with a friend, then you can feel at home instantly. And I think that's what happened with Roger and I. When we joined Purple, we were able to fit in and be quite natural. I think it was an amazing moment. And so the chemistry worked very well, because you had a little 2 blocks there. One was established with Purple, and another one was already established as a team. So,
but what was the band before you came, and how, sound-wise, was it very different from?
Well, they were a little more restrained. I think they were evolving. I mean, bands do evolve, and I think I was a great fan. I had the first 3 Deep Purple records.
But they were not very well known.
Not in,
obviously,
they were huge in America.
The first time we really heard about you, about the group, was really when you were there. I mean, this is really the moment, at least in this part of the world, this is when we first heard.
Exactly. That's the truth. But it depends where you were, because in America they were huge, absolutely massive. And they'd already had 3 hit albums. They'd had #1 records with Hush, Kentucky Woman, River Deep Mountain High, top 10 singles. They were played on the radio all over the place, and they were massive in the States. But you're right, in Europe they weren't so well known. So,
how about England? Of course, England was your home place.
In fact, when we went out with Deep Purple, we were going out for less money than we were with Episode 6. So that shows the impact they had over there. But, you know, in the business, amongst the musicians, they were very well known and highly respected. And I think the idea of having not only the amazing Ian Pace there, but the idea of Richie and John, the interplay between the guitar and the Hammond organ, was quite a unique sound. And it was begging for more in terms of input, writing input, because they were doing a lot of covers at that time. They weren't writing everything.
Deep Purple is considered as one of the most influential rock groups of all time, but who originally influenced the band and influenced you in your music?
Well, we all brought our own. It's, you know, if you go to the pub and you're having a conversation with friends, you might be talking about football or sport one week, and you might be talking about politics and cultural things the next week. You might be talking about a movie or whatever it might be. You might be talking about education or anything at all. It depends who's sitting at the table. And that's very much the same with music. And I think when you look at what happened, Roger Glover was very interested in folk music and skiffle and the background of blues and that sort of, particularly folk though. I was into rock and roll and blues, but my grandfather was a singer. He sang opera. He was a bass baritone. My uncle was a jazz pianist, boogie woogie. I was a boy soprano in the church choir, and so when I left school, or in the last days at school, I was really getting into my Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and Little Richard and those sort of things. So I brought all that along. Richie Blackmore was the #1 session player, so he had technique and articulation, and he had absorbed a lot of styles of guitar playing and developed his own identity. Ian Pace was influenced by Buddy Rich and people like that, so he brought the swing, big band swing. And John Lord, of course, the dual influences of Jimmy Smith, Hammond organ, jazz, and the from his time at the Royal College of Music. I mean, his orchestral compositions were very important. So the spectrum, the panoply of influences was huge, absolutely huge. And then, of course, you'll get together and you speak with one voice, and so it becomes Deep Purple. But that Deep Purple can play soul, jazz, blues, orchestral, folk, rock and roll, and it's because it's the same singer, the same rhythm section, the same soloists. It sounds it's the same voice. It's the same band voice that's speaking. So when we did Deep Purple in rock, I think we weren't finished with development. So that's when we did Fireball, which was the second album, which the industry hates your second album because they want it to be the same as the first. But we had more to come out. And I think if we had not made Fireball immediately after Deep Purple in rock, we would not have been able to make Machine Head, which was the album we did in Montreux. And that was the culmination of all the influences coming together and suddenly speaking with the voice of Deep Purple.
Talking about Deep Purple in rock, the originality of your voice and the way you play with your voice and with this extreme facility of range that you go through, what was your, let's say, what was your source of influence? Did you have singers that you particularly admired, or did you create this on your own? How did it happen?
Well, I think you find your own voice. Of course, like everyone else, I copied and I copied and I copied. Everyone from Ella Fitzgerald to the young Elvis Presley, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Cliff Bennett, Dusty Springfield. The list is endless of the number of people that influenced me. Then, of course, my professional side, I was with Episode 6. So we had a girl singer that would come out the front sometimes, was a big harmony band, so we used to do a lot of West Coast harmony stuff. And so I used to go and play keyboards when the girl was singing. And with 6 voices, of course, and suddenly she's singing lead, so her voice has moved into the middle. Somebody's got to replace the top part. So I started doing all this very high part as a harmony, and suddenly realized that it could be brought into, that was part of my range, and so I could then bring it into the lead vocal. And I really wasn't happy with my normal voice until I got to about 50 years old. I mean,
really?
Yes, absolutely. I thought the mid-range, I always wanted to sound like Cliff Bennett.
It's so amazing you say that, because so many people have admired, and you know that, of course, have
Well,
admired your voice so much for years and years and years.
Thank you very much. It's only a tonal thing. That my tone, to me, was there was this part of the high mid-range that I couldn't control properly. I couldn't get enough bite into it. It was a bit loose and floppy, and I've got it absolutely nailed now. So it's that's my personal thing,
Rock music was an expression of rebellion in its beginning at a large extent. I don't know if you agree with that, but was it the case for you in these years, like in the 70s, in a moment, for instance, where here in Switzerland, radio, television would never play rock.
Yes.
When we wanted to listen to your records, and I remember I was 17 when I bought Deep Purple in rock. I remember at that time I had this album in front of me, and our media would never ever play it. So we took it as an expression of rebellion. Did you feel this yourself?
So I think our generation was rebelling against some of the Victorian constrictions, not necessarily morally, but the old-fashioned uniform way of behavior. I think there was time for a cultural revolution. It was that kind of thing, and of course the previous generation didn't like it, and consequently I think the media inflamed a lot of this. It wasn't quite as everyone remembers it. I mean, the audiences were a lot quieter than they are now, and there was not the craziness that there is now, but there was a lot less of it, and so it was more the highest common factor rather than the lowest common denominator. And I think it had its moments, and it was expressed because the instruments were loud. My uncle was a great musician, and when he first heard Deep Purple in rock, he was so excited. He came in because he'd heard these nice Episode 6 records, which were all harmony and studio produced with overcompressed rhythm guitars and things like that, which he thought was delightful. And then he heard Deep Purple in rock, and I put it on, cranked it up full volume, and he ran from the room screaming. He said, "Oh, it's horrible, it's horrible, it's horrible," because he thought it was atonal, and it was it didn't have much to do with music. He thought it was more destructive than anything else. And I suppose to an extent it was destructive. But in order to what's that old saying? To make an omelette, you've got to break some eggs. So I think that's the way it was. And don't forget that the technology was also changing. And I don't know if chicken and egg, which inspired let's get away from the analogies, but Jim Marshall came along at the same time. So you've got amplifiers, you've got Fender guitars, and you've got Gibsons, and you've got huge great Hammonds that are suddenly now not just going through Leslie cabinets, which are made for ballrooms and jazz and that sort of thing. They're suddenly going through Marshall stacks, and they're roaring and loud, and you're suddenly getting, the drummer needs to be amplified because he can't be heard, and so everything needs to be louder than everything else, and suddenly you've got this wave of power coming at you. And the knock-on effect with the record labels and the PR people and the magazines and the radio stations and the pirate stations, and this thing was an underground culture. It was a youth culture that I think was a rebellion as such, but I don't think it was entirely the music, because a lot of it was quite cerebral. But it certainly knocked a few walls down, yeah.
Do you feel that the spirit of rock and roll still exists today, that type of spirit, or is it something that really is past?
Well, I think it was, I'm sorry, but I think it was kind of nonchalant. We were just having fun. And I think it became contrived over the years. I think it became worked out and organized, and therefore not quite so meaningful. I'm not sure if it exists now, no. I think it exists in the memories of, no, not really. I don't think it does. I don't think there's much to rebel against now. I think probably people are trying to moved back. The pendulum has swung probably back towards the middle now.
Ian Gillan, what is your motivation today for continuing with Deep Purple after all these years?
Well, I don't know how long it's going to last, but it keeps me fit. It keeps me out of trouble. But that's being flippant, and that's been my biggest problem. I think what keeps me going is the fact that I'm working with probably the best bunch of musicians I've ever worked with, and I've worked with some fantastic players. But when I say, I'm not talking about the individuals as such, I'm talking about the cohesion that makes Purple what it is. It's a combination of the material that's accumulated over the years, the understanding of the audience, the youth of the audience, and the fact that we face a challenge every single day. So I don't know how much longer it's going to last, but while I still got my voice, I treasure every moment of it.
What are today your subject, your personal subjects of rebellion? What revolts you today most in modern time?
Sorry?
What revolts you most in the modern time? What makes you, let's say, the most rebellious today in 2010?
I'm afraid I've moved on from that into a metaphysical world. I spend my life now studying my life's work and developing a thing called the infinite God. And so our behavior patterns on the planet don't really bother me anymore. I see a lot going on. You see things that are huge in some parts of the world, but it's like the purple thing we were talking about earlier. Other parts are not even aware of it. So I've been spending all my life, I heard the word infinity when I was 8 years old. And I've been spending my entire life trying to put that into perspective. And I left the church when I was 12, 13 years old because they wanted to divorce my intellect from my spirit. And I believe they're irrevocably entwined. And so I left the church, but I believe in God, and I believe in the infinite God. And I'm trying to really find a way of expressing that in maybe just a couple of pages. So that's my search. And so what revolts me now is not much. I think I've seen the most disgusting things. We do not understand, I don't think, what kind of trouble we're in. I think we are blithely going ahead without any idea of how this rate of expansion is unsustainable. And I don't see it. A few years' time, we're going to be 9 billion people on the planet. And we're only one species. We've got no diversity at all. And when you get a disease, it spreads from throughout the entire species. And so I think we've got to be careful about our physical existence, because I don't think there's long to go on that. However, I've got hope, because if we can recapture the things that we lost when the witch doctors came along, which is our developed sense of empathy, which, who knows, maybe telepathy, then maybe we can come out of this cocoon and stop being caterpillars and be a butterfly and fly away. Who knows?
Thank you very much, Ian Gillan.
Pleasure.